Good morning. Hugh Gillies, Transport Scotland. My first, I think, sortie as director. I've been in post a year and a day, and I think the remit is to reflect on that. And it's my first sortie, although I've spoken at events before here in London, but never as director. So it's a first. So you're all guinea pigs. Sorry about that. And I've also come in disguise. So some of you know me, and I grew a beard. So Joe didn't recognise me. He's now going, yeah, it's Hugh. Yeah. So. Yes, you're going to see lots of pictures of bonnie Scotland, and yes, there'll be some slides, but hopefully I'll keep it light and fluffy. But the one thing that really struck me straight away from the first four speakers is the common themes you're going to hear throughout the day and the interdependencies about how we operate our transport networks, in particular from my focus, roads. But it's not by accident that I'm also within Transport Scotland Director for Resilience, and I'm also Director for Digital. And everything I'm going to talk about, I want you to start to think about the interdependencies of all that. As I say, the first four speakers that I've heard this morning have touched on themes that I certainly recognise. Yes, you all know where Scotland is, and some of it's going to be a shameless plug. Come and visit us, tourism, etc. I hope you can understand me. I'm doing my best Sean Connery, but I did work in England for 3 years. I did some missionary work, and I do recognise that slow down thing. Some of you are very familiar with who Transport Scotland are. Some of you have never heard of us potentially, but we are the Scottish Government's national transport agency, and we have a finger in every single transport pie, whether it's devolved to us directly or whether it's through matters which are retained by Westminster in the case of aviation. But we have a policy for everything, and that's not by accident, and I'm not about to talk about the Scottish Government's purpose. And it lets us keep our hand on the tiller of how our transport serves Scotland going forward. And my job as a senior civil servant is to work across government. Transport is a derived demand for the most part. So I think the lady from Transport Focus was talking about moving from A to B, people and goods. That's absolutely true. Transport has to work for the country. Whether it's at a national, international, regional, local level, it has to work for us. And those who work in this industry, and like myself, are responsible for that. Bit of a crowded slide there, but basically I'm remitted as a senior civil servant within Scottish Government to work to the Scottish Government's purpose, and that's about sustainable economic growth. That's where I fit in, and some of the higher level key priorities for us. But moving on, and just in the last speaker there, there's lots of figures in there, but just look at that slide, just look at the trunk road network around Scotland. It's not by accident, it crisscrosses the country from tip to toe, from Ireland down to the border with England and then across to Northern Ireland. My job at working with my colleagues is to keep that road open as much as possible, available space, so that we can keep goods and services going and people going as much as possible. That's my job day in, day out, and if I do that, then that's fine. Big focus for us, as I say, shameless plug for tourism, but also growth sectors, food and drink, whisky, tourism, even our network at the very top, people use it for leisure. Again, a shameless plug for the North Coast 500. Go to TripAdvisor, I think it's the top 10 places to visit, and it's been an outstanding success, and part of that route is on the A9 north of Inverness, all the way up to John O'Groats. So some of the common themes, and we heard there about accidents, and casualty reduction. There is no doubt about it that is a big ask. Scottish Government put in a programme for target-driven approach some years back through to 2020, and we're making some good progress in that. But it's tough, and if you recognise some of these themes, older drivers, motorcyclists, cyclists, and an ageing population, I think that's just not restricted to Scotland. I think we could all recognise that within the Western world as a challenge for all of us. And again, we're still relying on engineering, education, enforcement and encouragement. A lot of you will know about the A9 average speed camera scheme, capitalising on technology. Again, bringing in those interdependencies has been a success for us. And again, in terms of enforcement, working with police colleagues around, for example, the mobile charges penalties, which have come across the UK this week. And also about if the road's closed due to a fatal accident, yes, due process has to be gone through to gather the evidence to lead to any prosecutions to understand, but it means the road is closed. Obviously, if the A9's closed for 6 hours, that is a lot of goods and services getting held up while that road is closed. So we want to open as quickly as possible while being sensitive to the the fatal and the fact that somebody may have lost their life, obviously. Resilience and winter challenges. I think, again, lady from Transport Focus mentioned Storm Doris. The slide on your left is the Rest and Be Thankful. If you know Scotland, just north of Loch Lomond, is become synonymous with landslips for us, and we've had to put in a lot of mitigation to try and deal with that. We can't build our way out of that problem, or we could, but it would cost us hundreds of millions of pounds to put road and stilts or to cover it. But we need to put in a mitigation now to deal with that. So we've really honed our resilience responses right across Scotland to deal with these things. And then obviously we have the winter challenges. But resilience goes beyond just winter weather or weather. It's also industrial relations, and it's also terrorism, even through to Scotland. If you think of Tunisia, Scottish ministers will want to know how Scottish nationals are faring, for example, abroad. They will want to know that, and we have to tap into that, to understand that. And another example of industrial relations and impacting on supply chains, believe it or not, Operation Stack in Kent affected us in Scotland because we've got tens of millions of pounds wrapped up in white fish products that need to get to market day and daily to across to Normandy, because that's where the main white fish port for distribution market rather is. And if they don't get there, those goods spoil. And obviously that absolutely scuppers that particular industry. I'm going to dwell on this slide for one more point, and that is to show you, when it comes to a resilience challenge, where road sits. Now, I've participated in more SCOR calls. Now, that's the Scottish Government equivalent to COBRA that I would care to remember. And when you go into the chronology of these things, it's always the same. If it's not a weather event, then we're on second. If it is a weather event, rather, we're on second. But if it's not, we're on first. Transport is on first, and road is at the top of that. And the reason for that is everybody else's default, if they cannot move by ferry, rail, aviation, is to go by road. And then by default, again, that means the strategic trunk road network. So that just shows you, when you get into those moments, how reliable we are on our trunk road network. And by that, the other thing I'd like to say around that is just, again, we're talking about managing expectations. If you think about all the things that have happened, I referenced, for example, that crisis with the white fish. We had it last year with the Forth Road Bridge. You had it last year with Cumbria. People's expectations, the public's expectations, media's expectations, business expectations around having transport systems available to them, the subconscious expectations are absolutely enormous. 24-hour society. Their conscious tolerance of it not being there is tiny. And you've got to square that off, and that's a tough ask, but it's there all the time, and you have to respond to that as quickly as possible. Again, into the pit, just moving on, talk about asset management. We've put a lot into this. It's important for us to understand. One of the first things I did when I came into post is to understand this as much as possible. I consciously, when I went for the job last year, I shamelessly said one of my priorities is to go and win as much money as I can in these stricken times to put money into my asset, which is the trunk road network. If I can do that, I can keep the roads and fit for purpose, but also be able to articulate to ministers, decision makers, that get money in there. If I know my asset, I know its condition, I know where I need to smartly target that money. If I can put that forward in a plan, and I do have a plan, there you go, Scottish Government Road Asset Management Plan, then I'm in a good place to argue for that. So if you're on your toes, as we were last year when the Scottish Government said there's £100 million for economic stimulus, we were able to go in late last summer and win some of that money to put that into structural maintenance. Next one, technology. We heard, I think, from the lady from Highways England about smart roads and Traffic England and so on and so forth. We're at the end of a 10-year journey, and we're about to start our next ITS strategy. In fact, the remit I've given to our guys is very simple. We cannot outrun Uber, Google, TomTom, but why should we? Why should government try to do that? So we need to get into a position of, and it was a colleague of mine who emigrated to New Zealand, and I'm going to borrow from him, when Transit New Zealand put together their ITS strategy of when do you lead, when do you partner, and when do you follow in this particular area? So I want our ITS strategy, which will come out in the summer, to be fleet of foot from three things. From a policy perspective, from a fiscal perspective, from a technology perspective, because a 10-year plan, when you put that in place, we'll need to have these three things as our pillars, and we'll need to revisit that every 3 years. Again, contemporary, here in London, big news for the Mayor, likewise for us. There's a Scottish Government commitment to have the first LEZ in place by 2018, so we're working with NGOs and stakeholders like Road Haulage Association, the bus industry, to make sure that we achieve that and what's involved. Just conscious of time. Again, talk about policy. We've come to the end of that 10-year cycle of the National Transport Policy. What will that mean for sustainable economic growth? We'll talk about mode hierarchies. And then we've got our build programme that sits in behind that, which is the Strategic Project Review. We've come to the end of that. You'll see that through the delivery of Queensferry Crossing, and then the M8 Baillieston Junction, and the rail investment between Edinburgh and Glasgow, which will cut rail journeys down to 37 minutes. Brexit and finance, we all recognise that. What the challenges for us within government to deal with Brexit, what does that mean for workforce, what does it mean for procurement, standards, you name it, there's a whole host of things, and we know certainly in the public sector that finance will continue to be a challenge. And then finally, HR challenges for me. For all these things, I've got to have the right skills in place, engineers, planners, IT specialists. I need to make sure that they are there. And transport is operating in a crowded field. There's lots of people competing in that area for these skilled people. And we've got to make sure that we secure those resources. Thank you.